You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast, all book lovers out there in 94 countries. I think we're up to 50 states and almost 2,000 cities. And I know why you're here. And it's not because of Chris and Kristen, although maybe a little because of us, because we're good interviewers, but it's especially because of very talented and gifted authors like Jessica Hagedorn. We're thrilled to have you here with us today, Jessica. Thanks for joining us.
I'm thrilled to be here, Chris and Kristen. So, thank you for having me.
Well, we're very excited for you and many congratulations because we're going to show the cover for our YouTube watchers that your book, The Dogeaters, has been chosen as a Penguin Classic novel. That is quite an honor and an achievement. Before we get started, this is not the only thing you've done. And we like to tell our listeners a little bit about your history, if we may.
Certainly.
You were born and raised in the Philippines. You came to the U.S. in your early teens. In San Francisco, you were mentored by the poet and translator Kenneth Rexroth. Dogeaters was winner of the American Book Award and finalist for the National Book Award. But that is not the only talent you have. In addition to being a novelist, you are a poet, a writer of very highly regarded theatrical works, including screenplays and scripts. And I was very impressed by this as well. From 1975 to 85, you led a band called the Gangster Choir.
Yes.
We have to hear more.
Yeah, I love music. And oftentimes, especially when I was a younger writer, I wrote to music, which a lot of writers prefer the solitude and the silence. And I actually do now as an older person. But when I was young, it helped me with rhythm of language. And I just think music is the highest art form. So I'd always wanted to combine poetry with a full band. I had a very ambitious vision of what I wanted to do. So that's what I did.
And then no surprise that you were involved in theatrical works because this combines all sorts of media in one place. You are the recipient of the Literary Honors Awards, which include the Rome Prize for Literature, Guggenheim Fiction Fellowship, Philippines National Book Award, Lifetime Achievement Award, and from the Columbus Foundation, I believe.
It's before Columbus, yeah.
Before Columbus, and that is just some of many, I am sure. But we are very honored to have you here with us today. We can't wait to dig into this classic.
Well, me too. I can't wait to hear how you are going to dig in. Let's do it. Mashed potato time.
Jessica, we'd like to start off by giving our listeners just a little bit of the background, what's going on in the story. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I would love it if you wanted to add anything, of course, at the end.
Sure.
Now, this story takes place in 1950s Philippines.
It sort of moves in time and actually goes circles. So I just want to make that prominent because it doesn't stay in the 50s, as you know.
That's exactly right. In fact, those shifts are very important. We're going to talk about those in just a little bit. Now, it's a very politically volatile time, and it's against that election-related violence, against the intrigue that accompanies it, that we see this world in which these characters are wrestling with all kinds of things that are going on at the time. They had an obsession with American pop culture. There was the Filipino traditions that were also a part of their lives. They were maybe pushing back against the Spanish colonialism. We had this picture of gossip and storytelling and all kinds of choices about behavior that were pushing the envelope. And we encounter characters who are wrestling with all of these things from all different strata of life. We meet a general, a movie star, a young person who is addicted to drugs, and a prostitute, some of the richest families in the Philippines. And we also center around Rio. She is a person in the story who she ultimately leaves her homeland, and she's remembering and reflecting back on this rich tradition and this rich culture that she came out of and that she grew up in. So it's a very interesting story about shifts, because we see shifts in perspective and time, but also a shift in understanding about
Yes.
what our background is like. Did you
Mhm.
want to add anything to that
Oh, yeah.
brief summary?
Actually, you covered such a complex landscape that I created, and kudos to both of you. I feel just that there is, that was my vision, to try to really paint this epic canvas without sacrificing the specifics of each character that lives in the book. Like when I adapted it for the stage, I couldn't use all those characters. I had to really think about who was going to be the most effective on stage. And you couldn't have 500 actors up there, unfortunately, or I would have done it, but they couldn't do that. So it really became thinking about what were the important points, of the story. And I was very interested in talking about what it means to be colonized. And the Philippines had been colonized so many times, not just by the US, but by the Spaniards for 400 years, the US for 50 years. And before that, so many different powerful nations had passed through and claimed it for a year or two until the next nation came in and fought them. And so it went way back. And at the same time, the colonizing also took the place of proselytizing different religions, right? There's a Muslim region in the Philippines that is very much its own fiefdom. And then there's the Catholics that were traditionally, brought there by the Spaniards, of course, and Christianity in many different forms, Protestantism and all that lives there. And then there are the indigenous peoples who, are animists. They worship nature. And so all of that lives side by side. So I think it's really about trying to capture that. It's a very complex story I'm trying to tell. And I think you did a very good job of sort of, bringing it into a accessible way of summarizing without sacrificing anything. But yes, I was interested in the very rich, the very poor, the young girl, Rio, who is being the observer, the stand-in for the reader, the writer, although I feel like I am all the characters I create. I don't have one favorite. I have, but I don't know if you notice this because it's a subtle thing, but there are only two characters who are the main I. They are the narrators, and it's Joey,
I thought Joey,
the street hustler, and Rio, who comes from a privileged family. They are the two real observers. Everybody else is in the story, in the network, and they're not telling their own story. They're not in control of it, So, and that was something I did unconsciously, which I think a lot of writers, they don't plot out, it's going to come out like this. It's sort of things come to you if you just let your mind go, and naturally become the way you weave it, the tapestry.
Well, we thank you for that, because we learned a lot about the Philippine nation through your experience and through these characters' lives. We walked beside them through the story.
I'm glad.
One quote that you actually just summarized really hit the reader hard, and it went like this. The latest national survey reports that 80 dialects and languages are spoken here. We are a fragmented nation of loyal believers, divided by blood feuds and controlled by the church. Our torrid green world is threatened by its legacy of colonialism and the desire for revenge. We suffer collectively from a cultural inferiority complex. We're doomed by our need for assimilation into the West. That summed it up so beautifully. And I had to ask you, as the author, you tell this story through many shifting viewpoints and characters, as we know.
Mm-hmm.
The characters are confused, pained, sometimes self-tormented. Their futures are limited, unclear. It spoke to the era and the time. I personally believe this book is a classic because it dares to speak the sometimes ugly truth about how corrupt governments, churches, and corrupt people destroy our humanity. But this is such a profound honor to be declared a classic. Why do you, as the author, believe this book is a classic?
Well, I don't think about it. I mean, it was an honor bestowed upon me by the publisher and the editorial board. And it's usually something I associate with a writer who is long gone. So it really is meaningful, deeply meaningful to me as a writer who's very much still here and working on her next book. So I was beautifully surprised. I mean, it's the kind of thing where people can say to you throughout, "Oh, you should win this prize," or it should be a this, it should be a that," and you can't worry about it or mull about it or brood about it. It's just like, well, great, thanks for saying that, but I don't spend time sort of thinking this should be a classic. I mean, I feel that what the honor means is it has lasting relevance. And considering the times in which we live, which are very filled with the same issues, I mean, things have changed and not changed, which is a line I put in the play version. Everything's changed and nothing has changed. Things are much better in the Philippines, but there are many things that have not changed. They're just different outfits, different ways of being corrupt now. And there are more brilliant people who can get an education, all that, climb out of the poverty, and things are not censored in the way they were during those times where, really, books were banned and the media was controlled by the government, et cetera, et cetera. So, but it can easily slip back because who's running the country now? The son of the former dictator. So, you just never know. And it just goes around and around like this. And it's quite great to be an older writer watching this whole thing. It's like a carousel, really of life. And you see, things really sort of move along and seem to step forward and then back again.
Mm-hmm. So true. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Jessica, I love this one particular character, and I was very intrigued by him, the very clear-eyed opposition leader, Senator Domingo Villa. Now, his writings were circulated in an underground pamphlet, and I just want to read a quick quote because I thought this was so interesting and ask you about it. "We Pinoy suffer collectively from a cultural inferiority complex. We are doomed by our need for assimilation into the West and our own curious fatalism." And he then says, he notes further that we're a complex nation of cynics and warring tribes who were baptized and colonized to death by Spaniards and Americans, betrayed and united only by a hunger for glamour and Hollywood dreams. I want to ask you about this because you had referenced it earlier. Did a lack of a unified identity leave the Filipino people susceptible to those kinds of influences from the West or from religious influences? What do you think?
Well, and I'm just one writer writing this one way of looking at things. I'm not trying to represent the nation by any means, but it's my belief that any nation that is not a nation, you see, I mean, if you look at the history of the Philippines, it was many islands that had different rulers, and they weren't one country. By the time Spain sent the Portuguese explorer Magellan over there to see what spices he could find, and to spread Christianity and, possibly take another nation for Spain. By the time that was happening, it wasn't called the Philippines. The Philippines was named after King Philip of Spain after the place was conquered, but people fought back. They were not interested in becoming subjugated. So I really want to make that clear. I think what happens, though, is after hundreds of years go by and different groups of indigenous people who are not necessarily connected to the other one tribe, it's a similar thing of what happened in the United States with the tribes that were their own, it's their own part of the country, part of the land. They're not thinking big nation. They're thinking my barrio, my neighborhood, my valley, my river. And perhaps they didn't even think of owning nature. That's a very Western concept of that. This is all mine. They had a connection to the land, but it wasn't necessarily about owning it. So it's a lot of profound stuff going on, and it's not like I was going to try and explain it all. I'm trying to also, believe it or not, entertain, and some of this stuff is funny. It's meant to be darkly funny, and the senator is funny. We had a great actor from the Philippines come to New York to play that role because he had to really sound like, this marvelous politician who was a really big-hearted person who was trying to oppose a very powerful tyrant. And he played it and that part that you like so much was part of his speech he makes, right? And he played it like tongue in cheek. We're, we're susceptible to Hollywood. Well, who isn't? Mm-hmm. Who isn't? I mean, I'm into pop culture. Everybody is. The whole world, is sucked into this stuff because it's fun and it's beautiful and it's a dream. And when you're working hard all the time and you can barely eat, I think you need your dreams, Mm-hmm. Those dreams become food. It keeps you going. It's like the church, it's the faith. So it's a Hollywood kind of religion, right? Or whatever it is now for the young people. It's different now. Hollywood doesn't have the same hold. Maybe some other thing, TikTok or something. TikTok dreams, right? But back then, it's Ginger Rogers, and you can have your own cinema, right? In these poorer countries, more impoverished cultures, but it's never going to have the budget that Hollywood used to have. So, you were always attracted. I remember being a kid going to the movies and I would watch all of them, Philippine movies and Hollywood movies. Yeah. And even as a child, I understood, wow, this one had, such effortless values, production values. And then this one looked like they were having a hard time making you believe, and that was the charm of it, that there was a ghost in the house, Yeah. The difference. But you love both of them. But one really sucks you up because how did they do that? And that was very powerful. And I'll never forget it. And I also wanted to pay homage to that, to say, when you grow up, in a hybrid culture that has both things coming at you, I'm very happy I had that experience because it's given me a real bigger view of the world and kind of empathy, as you say, walking in someone else's shoes and understanding things are never just black and white.
Yeah, well, you did a really good job too of offering those different world perspectives. And in fact, there was a quote from President McKinley in there that showed how the United States looked at these particular areas in different parts of the world that was very paternalistic and simplified.
Yes, it's a speech verbatim. And I found it in a library in New Hampshire when I was researching the book and still working on it very early on. And I was so stunned because I didn't grow up in the US, so I didn't have American history. So I was even finding out what was going on much later in life, because that stuff wasn't taught in Manila. In the school I went to, they presented a pretty glossy version of colonialism, things were great, and so you believed it because that's your teacher telling you that. And then suddenly it's much better now. People are getting a much more expansive view of what really happened. But when I was a kid in the 50s and 60s, please, I just bought it all, hook, line, and sinker. We were in good hands. It was benevolent. And, they never told us that thousands of Filipinos died in the Philippine-American War, So I discovered what Mark Twain wrote about it. He has a great book called Sitting in Darkness. And that's about, he was really against what McKinley was proposing, things like that, this imperialism. Yeah. But it's the British, we could go on. Chris and Chris.
Every country has historical textbooks,
including
ours. Yeah. Including ours that are not totally accurate.
Correct.
Because we want to paint a picture of our own nation in a specific way.
In a glorious way.
Yes, especially indigenous stories told in this country, right. We need to weigh and look at a little closer. But what I love that you did, you were very realistic with these characters. And although some of us have never traveled to the Philippines, we could relate and feel with them. We began to understand as the reader that as human beings, we are all far more alike than different. Their love for the theater, their wants, their basic needs are very similar to ours. Normally, when I look at a book, I talk about the juxtaposition of wealthy people versus impoverished people. But in your story, I saw a lot more similarities because of everything that they were enduring at the time. We saw the very wealthy, but we also saw the very poor, alcohol, drugs, focused on fashion, obsessions with sex. We saw theft, drug addiction, prostitution. There was some immorality woven in there. And I thank you for not whitewashing it. You made it very real to the reader. I think when we want to, like you say, empathize with another nation or another people, we have to be able to look at the cold, hard truth sometimes of what they endured. I wanted to ask you, when our freedom is gone, do we cling to those freedoms that we do have, even if they're bad? And when accountability is gone, when corruption reigns, does immorality accompany it? Not just for the Philippines, but for all of us?
Okay,
it's a tough one, right?
There's three questions in that one.
How about this one? When our freedom is gone, do we cling to those freedoms that we do have, the good or the bad, even the bad?
It depends on who you are. For certain people, I think their freedoms would be not necessarily good, bad. It's what it takes to get through the day. Mm-hmm. If you've been, working the fields and on very little, which is what happens when, things are, and you have no say, because as you say, when the freedoms are taken away, you have no say. You have to do it to feed the family, to feed yourself. You need respite. Everyone needs respite. Animals need respite. They need their water. If you keep beating a donkey, it's still going to need the water if you want it to work. You can beat it to death, but that's really dumb, but you know what I'm saying? Like, you have to sort of understand that donkey needs something to live so he can work for you tomorrow. So I think everyone clings to something. We all need it. Why am I going to get out of bed? Why am I going to get out of my grass mat, get up from it to get through another day? It's a very deep question you've asked, which I love. And then in terms of corruption, that's a great question. Could you say it again?
I said when accountability is gone, the reader felt a lack of accountability, both in the wealthy, in the government, and in the impoverished people. They were secretly, albeit secretly, doing things that maybe no one would ever find out about. A little lack of accountability. I wondered, does immorality come with that? If you know that you have no accountability, are you more inclined to be evil? I don't have an answer. I'm not leading you in any direction, but
yeah.
I felt this a little.
Well, I think of it as human nature. I don't think of it as evil or good or moral, immoral. I do think when there's no accountability and no respect for one another, just genuine respect. I mean, that's what you teach to a kid when it's very young. You teach them, no, that you can't throw sand in this other little person's face because it hurts their eyes. Maybe they don't know, so yeah, but why does it hurt them? Well, because it would hurt you. And would you, so that's how it starts, right? When there's no accountability on any level, and you see a government, this is a perfect question for our times, and corrupt people getting away with all kinds of stuff, and no one is stopping it. Well, cynicism sets in, and certainly, yes, all bets are off. I do believe that. It's like something is unleashed. Mm-hmm. And I felt that in those years in which I was going back and forth to the Philippines a lot to visit the family that I had there that never left. So I was living in San Francisco at the time, and in the 70s, and I didn't move to New York until late 70s. But during the height of this stuff, I was living in California still. So it was very easy to fly to see my father and to see my aunties and cousins and stuff. It was very important. And my brothers were there. They chose to live there because they wanted to, that this was their place. It didn't matter if it was corrupt or not. This was where they wanted to be. And I was homesick for it, but I couldn't go back. I saw it. You could see it. You could see it in the street. People living in the street. And I mean, like painful. And the same old people running things, right? So you'd see it because I was privileged. So I could go to nightclubs and watch the military come in. I was very interested as a writer to be able to observe anything and not to flinch, but to confront the ugly truth, because I knew I was going to write about it. I was burning to write a novel about my place of birth and the culture I really grew up in. I knew that was going to happen one day. I wasn't ready yet, but I was taking notes because I knew I was too young to get it, to understand the enormous stakes. Yeah. I knew it. Even back then, I knew you're not ready to write this yet. But you have to take notes now because it's happening in front of your eyes.
And that is why it's a classic, because you saw, you weren't trying to see, you just saw it, and it continues to happen. And you're speaking some truth, some really hard truth. It's not easy to look at some of these things. Mm-hmm. You dared to look at it, and you had the courage to tell it.
Every artist has to do that. That's our job. A writer's job is, or go do something else. I mean, it's sort of really, when I was teaching, I would say that to my students, you have to be ready for this. It's not always easy, and you have to want it so badly to become it on some level, so you can understand what it takes for a person to devolve into that person. Nobody is just born evil. It happens gradually. And I was always, here's another thing you really need if you want to write: curiosity. You got to want to know, well, how did this happen? And think about it as really interesting. Like I'm always like, why? I ask people all the time, why? Why do you love cooking? Why do you? And it's great. I learned so much from everyone who's willing to talk to me and or show me something, their work. Why are you a plumber? I get it. I mean, it's like fascinating. Nothing is boring. And you have to have that curiosity. If you don't have curiosity, you can't write it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I love that. I see so much of you in Rio as you were speaking, because she needed that perspective too of leaving her birthplace and just thinking about how you must have been thinking for decades about what happened. What was this? That's awesome. I have one more burning question I wanted to ask you, and this is just a short one. I'm obsessed with the senator. He was talking about this cultural inferiority complex. And I was wondering if you could expand upon that just a little bit, because he had so many insights. What was he referring to there?
I think it was referencing the old beliefs. That's not really the way things are now. I find the modern Filipino very aware of their great achievements and their brilliance in a lot of industry. There's a very healthy point of view going on that is so refreshing these days. And I see it in my younger nieces and nephews, who know exactly who they are and are proud of it, and who learn the language of whatever dialect from wherever they're from. They can speak it as well as English and blah, 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 and Spanish, and they're engaged with it. They don't think it's, I don't want to talk like that. Which in the 50s, remember, it was right after the war. World War II. And in the Philippines, we've seen a lot of the European theater of war, but there haven't been those films. Every time Steven Spielberg makes a great film about the war, it's always over there. But they've never really done a Pacific one, which also focused on the people whose lives were lost, the people from those places who paid the price of, the war. It's not just the American soldiers. It was the Filipino guerrillas who fought the war and helped win it in the Philippines. But there was always this I'm a second-class citizen. Oh, I'm not even a citizen. And I fought in the war. Okay. I mean, this went on in the 50s. And, it's only better if you speak English, and don't speak with an accent. And all of that was just hammered into us very casually. But, you become, oh, okay, you must be right. So it was just in our bones, this feeling that anything made in our own country was inferior to certainly, made in the US, made in France, made in wherever, anywhere but over there. Made in China, not good. Made in Japan, oh my God, not good. So, I mean, it was just normal. It was normalized. So that's what the senator's talking about. And when we did the stage adaptation, it was much clearer because I just said it in 1981. You see, that was the year of the film festival. That was historic when Imelda had her film festival and all those kinds of movies were being shown. I mean, that's all true. So I blended fact and fiction, invented stuff, embellished, took away. But I thought, it'll be much clearer to an audience if I just say, I don't try to make it be circular and time shifting. Set it in one period and just stick to that, and they'll get it. They don't have to run out and buy a book. The play has to have its own life. And it gave me a chance to revisit things like the senator's little handbook, which I ended up making a speech he does on stage. And it's all about pointing out how we grew up. And it's only 1981, so it's very fresh. We were still kind of thinking like that. It was always like, oh, is your shirt from the States? Or is it? They still do. They make the best imitations of the Gap, or, who's sewing your clothes nowadays? You see what I mean? That's how kooky we are. We're like, oh, so it's from the Gap, but it's made in the Philippines. So what are we talking about? It's funny to me. It's humorous.
Mm-hmm.
You have to laugh
Yeah.
because we're
Yeah,
silly.
absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate those insights and your remembrances greatly. Chris and I were talking how we do remember, as American citizens, some of these events unfolding. And for some of us, that was our first introduction to the history of your country and Imelda
Wow.
Marcos and,
Wait a minute.
all the
You
things
guys
that.
were around that time? No, that was like
Oh, yeah.
20,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
We're not going to say on
we were
air
around
how
for
old.
20 years. I mean, the leadership was 20 years. So I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
not necessarily the 50s. We're talking about in the 80s
No,
where we started
and
hearing in the
it
news
started in the
about this
60s and
dictator.
went into the yeah, yeah. They with the support of Ronald Reagan,
Yeah,
it's real.
absolutely.
Yeah. So
Well,
it's an interesting, it's fascinating stuff.
it
It's
is.
rich. It's rich.
It
Yeah.
is. And we thank you. And
Loved
Jessica,
it.
before we let you go, we do want to ask you had referenced maybe writing another story in the beginning. And I was wondering if you could maybe share without any details, what are you
Hmm.
working on next?
A memoir.
Oh,
Oh,
excellent.
I've
great.
heard, although, I would, yeah, and it's a non-traditional memoir. It's going to be like a hybrid memoir, which means it'll have visuals. It'll have different uh, types of writing. I think, for example, uh, we talked about my band way back when, So I have a archive of all my old flyers. Remember flyers from punk days and all those things. I see your haircuts. Yeah. Um, so I would like to just juxtapose those images of those times with the writing. Yeah. So it's like
Fantastic.
without having to explain, oh, this was a poster from my time at the Mud Club. No, you don't even say anything. It's all on the poster.
Yeah,
And
that's wonderful.
yeah,
Well,
Great.
thank you for sharing that. We
yeah,
just absolutely loved having you on. You have so many cool insights, but your lived experience is amazing. We can't wait for that memoir. And in the meantime, we hope that our listeners and our readers will go out and read this book and
love
think
that
about it
cover.
and talk about it. It is wonderful. I'm going to tell our
Thank
listeners real quick too how to get in touch with you. You have a beautiful website, jessicahagedorn.net. And I know people will want to try to connect with you. And I really encourage them to get out and get this book. It is fantastic. So
Thank
thank
you
you
very
again.
much for having me. It was fun.
It was our pleasure. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you. Many congratulations to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, Kristen, I really love Jessica Hagedorn. And, these are one of the books that you read and you close and you say, I learned so much in this story. This was an era that we lived through, some portion of it, and we knew some of what was going on, but she opened our eyes to a lot of the real life of the Filipino people during that time. And it's a treasure. No wonder it's a classic. That's all I
Yeah,
can say. Just loved it.
absolutely. Absolutely. And, it really prompted me to go back and do a little bit of research. And I think you said the same, where, we had one perspective growing up, but we didn't realize that long history of conflict and not just in elections, but these warring tribes, these different values and different factions. So to think about how to unify people, what are they united around? I don't know. What struck you about that?
It's interesting. I think I read that the country had known occupation from colonialism. Jessica named a few: the Chinese, the Japanese, the Malaysians, the Spanish. They finally achieved their independence from the U.S. in 1956. That's
Yeah.
not that long ago. That's hundreds of years of influence and occupation and ruling. And you can see in her book, like I like your question, they struggled with identity. And then
Yeah.
you struggle with what is the best identity that she spoke of in the end. Who should we be? Maybe not who we are. And I believe they're coming to terms with it now. But it really gave you a love for the country when you're finished looking at everything that they endured, empathy for the country, and a respect.
Yeah, no doubt. And my uncle served in the Philippines. He was part of the U.S. military, and I have pictures of him from the 1950s. I want to say 1954, and I wish now I could go back and ask him about his observations and his experience because he wrote a couple times under a note that he had wonderful interactions with the people
Wow.
and just a warm welcome that he had. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
I loved
Well,
it.
oh, yeah, very good. Well, I want to tell our listeners about some other amazing authors that we have coming up. And I'm going to just give a few, but we've got a long list. Victor Methos, The Silent Watcher. Graham Brown, writing for Clive Cussler, Desolation Code. Alex Hay, The Queen of Fives. Samantha Green Woodruff, she's coming back to talk about The Trade Off. Fiona Davis, also coming back, The Stolen Queen. Carter Wilson, Tell Me What You Did. And let me tell you, that book kept me up all night. Jill Shalvis, Better Than Friends. Heather B. Moore, Lady Flyer. Mark Greene, Midnight Black. Andrews and Wilson are coming back with Defense Protocol. Marshall Karp, Don't Tell Me How to Die. Brett Battles, writing for Stuart Woods' Golden Hour. And Tess Gerritsen, The Summer Guests. We are very excited about this lineup. And as you heard Chris say in the beginning, we're growing every week, 94 different countries or territories, all 50 states, many, many, many cities. We are thrilled and we just thank you. We ask that you keep spreading those socials. And until next time, listeners, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.